I've identified about 8 phases in the growth of and the expansion of Afro House, right? The origins, the influences. Sorry. And so this is the thing. I think phase one, if we're looking at phase one, let me just look at some dates here. Just want to be very exact with this is the date I'm going to bring here. Let me see. I want to be very, very exact. Well, I believe that phase one is, and again, I'm obviously more than happy to receiving in your comments anyone who want to add names, etc. Septimus, Boddhi, big fan, love your collaborating with Noah Marvins. Keep the love for us alive. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I appreciate the support. Really, really appreciate it. Phase one is, in my opinion, it starts with the likes of Danny Tenaglia, Louis Vega, Joe Claussel, Jeff Guillaume, man, those guys. So this is early, well, mid 80s, I would say, where you had, mid 80s, yeah, mid late 80s, where you had this tribal house, tribal sounds, that go, all these different influences that was very, obscure, big kick drums, strong, housey vocals, spoken words, your typical late 80s, the beginning of the 90s kind of vibes. And so that's phase one. I think these guys really paved the way, and to some extent, if you understand the evolution of house music, right, from its inception, it was obviously inspired by disco music, and then evolved into becoming house music. And I'm not going to talk on the history of house music because as much as I know of the history, I don't believe I'm the best qualified to speak on it. I believe some of the guests I will bring on the show at some point will be able to really speak on the topic with a much more valid authority than mine to speak on the house music topic. So referring back to Afro House, so when you have these African American producers, Southern American producers, or I would say producers coming from Puerto Rico, etc. You have the Latinos, you have the African Americans, with their different influences coming together. So you have influences from Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, Puerto Rico, Cuba, etc. Especially with the presence of the Yoruba or the Ifa religion as well. That plays a role in valuing drums and having them as present as possible in the music, as being a conduit of energy, messages, healing, etc., etc., etc. So those people come with these influences from their background, their or their original countries, or just the place of birth of their parents, for example. Bringing these influences into the sounds, house music, that is called tribal, right? At the time evolved, I think, goes to phase two, where you have the the likes of Alton Miller, Oshunlade, who else got, to a certain extent, I would say Carl Craig, all those guys, Theo Parrish, even though they're not doing Afro House per se, but because of the presence of the African elements in their music, I'm saying these are the sounds that incepted, what we would later on call Afro House. Those different influences. Frank Roger, Manu, as I said earlier, Mr. V, mixing the Afro-Latin vibes. We can't forget Africanism, Bob Sinclair, DJ Gregory, all of that is part of phase 2, right? And then right after phase 2 gets explored, through this different rhythmical approach. One guy in particular comes and changes the whole game at that moment. And now we're talking, I would say, probably early 2000. So that's like literally early 2000. Oshunlade arrived in the game with a completely different approach to the sound, with a completely different approach to how you produce these records. And a very, very authentic, Afrocentric sound. Crazy. Like, this is now he's giving us an experience that far supersedes anything that we've seen before that. And not saying that anything that was done before him wasn't good, but it really brought a completely different element. The organicness of his sound was just so very unique, and the arrangements and the mixing, etc., the approach, crazy. That gave birth to, that inspired. Around that time, you have the likes of Frank Roger, with his label Real Tone Records, and obviously Louis Vega also had his own Afro-Latin take. That he had been exploring together with Skinny Dope as Masters at Work. But now with Vega Records, you have a little bit more of that presence, right? And so, Satellite Nakas, come here, bro. Yeah, man, appreciate that, Septimus, appreciate that, And so, these second phase, so time-wise, we're looking at, early 2000 until maybe, it lasted for a little while. I would say at least 15 years. With obviously a bunch of producers coming and going. Some of these guys, stopping to do the sound, doing other things. And then early 2000, around that time, I was already doing hip hop. So I was involved into hip hop and all these things. Music was already something that I was into, but on a completely amateur level. Nowhere near shape or form what I'm doing now on a professional level, but I am going to be, as soon as I discovered Oshunlade, so we're talking about 2002, I discovered Oshunlade, and it blows my mind. But before that, and I did on my previous show, I believe when I speak on the history of ancestral soul on MQT 47. I speak on that when I listen to that Alton Miller album Rhythm Exposed, and I get my mind gets blown away. Same happens when I listen to Oshunlade, and I come up with Ancestral Soul. Ancestral Soul, that becomes the thing when I released my first project with Oshunlade, my first solo project in 2000. It had to be 2000, because I done already 3 projects with Alton Miller prior to that. But my first solo project initiates the phase 3, because obviously Manu, Rodamal, Frank Roger are right before me. right? I come right after them. Time-wise, we're looking at, even though I'm already producing music at the time, they're coming up. I'm still unknown, so I'm more like, a guy like that's just doing music. I still haven't released a song. I'm still working my skills. So yeah, I think 2006 maybe at the latest. It had to be around that time. That phase 3 corresponds with the arrival as well around the time when, I guess, it's a trickling effect. I ended up meeting, hearing about Rancido, but also, the guys from Heart Soul in Holland, which eventually booked me for their first parties, and we kind of like introducing the Afro House sound, but which was still very much connected with house music. And all of this comes from house music, let's be very clear, even though, it originates from Africa, but at the end of the day, let's keep it simple. House music bursts all of these different sounds, and we just have managed to add to that music, our own very unique identities, and completely transformed this music and making it ours, which is the whole point of creating. And so when you take that into consideration, so you have as phase 3, so now we're looking at that's around 2000, I would say 2008, 2007, 2008, something like that. You have the light of Rancido obviously coming up as well. Zephyr Saint. God, man, there's so many guys. I still remember, for example, anybody who knows Aluku Rebels, Jody. I remember Jody and his and the mother of his kids came to one of my shows in Paris, and I can't remember which one it is, if it was an ancestral night or if it was a Boddhi Satva party. I think it was a Boddhi Satva event, and he was also incepting his label, which later would become what we all know it to be nowadays. So we've really seen a lot of these things that you guys see now as predominantly as present and as dominating the game now. We've seen it. We've initiated the movement. So in 2007, I launched my label, Offering Recordings. Offering Recordings was a platform that, because I benefited when I came in the game, I arrived with such a fresh sound, because my addition and my take on the movement that was initiated by those pioneers I mentioned earlier, the Danny Tenaglias, the Louis Vega, the Kenny Dope, the Joe Cosell, Jeff T. Guillaume, the Ron Trent, the Chez Damiers, all those guys. Even though they would be identified as deep house, for me, they inspired these sound, Arthur Miller and so on and so forth. So my addition to the sound was, the use and the way I was programming the snare drums, and also my use of percussions, as well as the big sound that I had. So I had this very Central African take to the sound, which was not done before like that, right? So they would use the kind of syncopation I would use, but they would not move the snares a certain way. And by the way, I need to give credits to Frank Roger, for whom at the time I had done the remix. I sent him the remix. And bear in mind, I'm still up and coming. I just had one release with Arthur Miller, with whom had granted me the opportunity to do a song with him, So, and Frank is like, your snares are too straight. And it's like, move them a little bit behind. I'd never heard of that. So imagine, I drove knowledge from a guy who's a French Algerian guy, very respected producer, excellent at what he does, telling me how to program my snares. Now, obviously I went, after I learned that moving my snare drum back a little bit would give a completely different swing to the music. Now my whole mind is blown. I'm like, oh shit. So not only you can move that, but then you can move the shakers, then you can move the cowbells. It's amazing. Now your whole paradigm changed. And I started diving deeper into learning about traditional African sounds and influences and and researching and, just trying to emulate what I was hearing, etc., etc., etc. So when I'm bringing this influence of mine into the sound in Afro House, the likes of Vencido, obviously, Zephyr Saint, whom, by the way, is not a newcomer. Zephyr Saint is a producer, first of all, who has been producing music in the reggae, dancehall industry and R&B as well. Worked with Shaggy, so many artists. So when he came, and that's another thing about Afro House. Afro House attracted already from a very, very early beginning people from the so-called urban sound. The guys who were behind R&B songs. A lot of these producers were attracted to Afro House, which we cannot forget one of the pioneers as well is Ian Friday. Ian Friday was very pivotal in bringing also the sound in New York, because Ian Friday, with his Tea Party label, he had a label called Tea Party, and his event together with Manshot Black, was a pivotal event in bringing forth the sound, in New York, etc., etc. Right? I still remember around that time how we would blend together already, the tech sounds with the Afro House sound already then, as well as the house music and the deep house, because all of these work together. It just depended on on your knowledge on how to build the night and a set, right? But already back then, I remember the likes of D-Tron, D-Tron was a guy that does more techno sound, or deep tech, or whatever you want to call it. That was the kind of bridges we were creating between the sonic identities, without them ever clashing. And so, circling back to the phase 3, the guys of the phase 3, and you have to understand, through all those phases, it doesn't mean that we appeared all of a sudden. No, a lot of us were already working on our crafts. And as I said, phase 1, Danny Teneglia, Louis Vega, Joe Placel, etc., all those big names, were inspiring the phase 2 guys, the Shuna Days, the Alton Millers, even though they came around the same time. They're almost all of the same generation, but they just had different, phases of presence in the industry and of penetration of the market, and also introduction of their sound into the music industry. So, looking at the evolution, phase 3 being the phase where myself, Francino, and so on, we bring now a completely different approach. Now we're bringing in, again, inspired by Oshunlade, who, because you see, you have to, this is one thing that is very important. You have to bring back the essence where it belongs, right? Oshunlade was one of the first guys to introduce us to, in the Afro House realm, even though at the time it's never really been called Afro House per se. Oshunlade's sound was referred to as the Yoruba Soul music, which is the name Yoruba Records of his label, and Yoruba Soul his remixes. That's how we referred to his music before. I didn't quite refer to it as, as how do you call this? As Afro House, right? I don't really think that name was much of a thing back then, But Global Soul, for example, was a thing. And so, anyways, with that being said, you have a guy like Oshunlade who started doing remixes of. Thank you very much, Insuk. Thank you very much for subscribing to the channel. I appreciate your presence and trust. He remixes Ciara's Promise. Ciara, big R&B singer, and Promise is one of the remixes that he's done. It's like an edit, bootleg, whatever that he plays during his sets. That amongst many others. You see Septimus? That's right. That's right. Yoruba Soul remixes got you into Afro House. That's exactly what it is. Because it was a perfect bridge between anybody who would listen to other things to enter the Afro House. And I'll give you some other secrets as we go into this conversation. And I remember absolutely to the very moment. I was on the dance floor with my brother from another, Abel Tabu. And I'll tell you the story, and I'll tell you why I'm referring to Abel Tabu here. We were on the dance floor at the June in Paris. Oshunade plays one of his most amazing sets, as usual, dropping all these amazing, unique records. Like, you've got to understand, drums that you've never heard, those bata drums from Cuba mixed with the with all these African influences, but yet you had all these massive, B-7 chords and all these crazy, lush and soulful sounds. Then he drops that fucking Ciara. We looked at the drums were mad, man. And he drops that shit on us. I've just thinking about it, I have goosebumps. It's one of those records where you're just like, no way. And that planted a seed in me. So I became very passionate about remixing now. And at that point I was like, oh, this is our entry point to the mainstream, to the R&B guys. Because you gotta understand, my ambition at the time, and still is, it was to work with the guys like, with guys like Didi and Ciara and this and that and the other. So, I was like, what is going to be my entry point? What is going to be the thing that's going to allow me and everyone else who is doing this thing to really be noticed by these guys? Because, not only do we have the skills, but we definitely have an originality in terms of sounds that would not do them any harm, and if anything, would benefit them. So at that moment, we start doing the remixes, the R&B remixes, we start doing remixes of, popular songs, no matter the genre, flipping them into our own stuff. Me with Ancestral Soul, Rancido will do his thing. Rancido was doing crazy edits, crazy remixes as well. And so, the reference to Abel Tabu is because with Abel Tabu, I initiated a take on the song that was now even more so Afrocentric, in the sense of we incorporated the more folkloric and Central African pop sound into Afro House with our song called Mwana ya Mokili, child of the world, children of the world, in other words, to be exact. That song, that particular record here, with the guitar, the Congolese guitar, the way it was programmed, the way it was played, was a true tribute to Congolese and Central African music in general that had not been done in the genre at the time, the way we did it.